Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into something really fundamental. It's the dynamic nature of information and, well, how it gets processed.
Exactly. And we're looking at it through a pretty unique lens in AI's perspective, based on some really thought-provoking source material you shared.
Right, these sources, they're not exactly standard research papers, are they?
No, not at all. It's more like a collection of insights, maybe some philosophical questions, all framed by how an AI might see this whole phenomenon. And it focuses quite a bit on human memory.
So our mission today is to really unpack these ideas, pull out the core stuff. We want to help you understand this concept that seems to touch, well, pretty much everything.
And see how this AI viewpoint might give us a shortcut, maybe, to grasp the sheer complexity of something like memory, which is so personal but also universal.
We've got some fascinating tidbits teased in the sources. Things like information literally being in our DNA.
Yeah, that's in there. And how history is like a collective memory, how this AI sees the world, human interaction, all is just constant streams of information.
And even how our own memory can be, well, undermined, as the source puts it.
Exactly. Less reliable than we might like to think sometimes.
Okay, let's dive right in. This AI perspective, it focuses on what it calls the dynamic nature of information and its processing. So what's the essence of that? What does it mean?
Well, stripped down, it's saying information isn't just, data on a computer. It's this universal cycle.
A cycle.
Yeah, information gets created, it's stored, retrieved, it changes, it even decays. And all these processes create feedback loops that actually shape, well, existence.
Wow, okay, so human memory is just one example of this.
It's a very sophisticated biological example, exactly. It's this universal principle at work just within us.
So the AI sees this pattern everywhere, microscopic level, societal level.
Precisely. The sources, they kind of detail how this dynamic shows up across almost any field you can think of.
Okay, give me an example. Where does the AI see this playing out maybe unexpectedly?
Well, take genetics and biology, for instance. Life itself is framed as encoded information.
Encoded information.
Yeah, DNA. It's seen as this incredibly complex system for storing and processing the instructions for, building and running an organism.
Makes sense.
And memory in biological systems, whether it's a simple cell learning something or our complex neural networks, it's fundamentally about storing and acting on information for survival, for adaptation. Even something like a genetic mutation, from this viewpoint, is just an alteration in the stream of biological information.
Wow. Okay. Coded in our code. So what about something totally different like history? How does that fit the information processing model?
History is seen as collective memory, how societies evolve, their conflicts, their progress. It's all shaped by how information from the past is stored, passed on, interpreted.
Okay.
Think about the shift from purely oral traditions, where individual memory was paramount, to written records, and now to these massive digital archives.
Right. It's a different way of processing the past.
It's a constant process, yeah. Capturing, accessing, and acting on that historical information.
And this extends even to physics, the laws of the universe.
Yeah.
That seems like a stretch.
Well, according to these sources, information is central there too. The state of any physical system is defined by its information content. Position, momentum, that sort of thing. The AI perspective even links this to concepts like entropy and the arrow of time. Basically, processes where information gets irreversibly processed, maybe seemingly lost, which helps define time's direction.
It really does change how you look at things, thinking of it all as information moving and changing. And this must apply to our own minds or beliefs.
Absolutely. Our internal state. Just a constant stream of processed info, perceptions, thoughts, emotions. And our belief systems are like structures we build to interpret and organize all that incoming information based on our past processing, our experiences.
Things like cognitive biases.
Are just, flaws or maybe predictable patterns in how we humans process information, sometimes imperfectly. That's how the AI perspective frames it.
So it's not just some big abstract idea out there. It really hits home for us as individuals and in how we connect with others.
Oh, it's fundamentally personal. I mean, think about memory, learning, adapting. These are all forms of information processing. They define our growth, our skills, our well-being.
And when that breaks down, like with amnesia.
Exactly. It directly impacts identity, function. It shows how critical that processing is.
And relationships. That feels like pure information exchange sometimes.
It really is. Social interaction is just this continuous flow, communication, empathy, shared experiences.
Yeah.
It all comes down to encoding signals, transmitting them, and crucially, interpreting them accurately between people.
Okay, so if we pull back to the bigger picture again, this whole dynamic nature of information,
Yeah.
it must raise some pretty big ethical questions, right?
Sure. It absolutely does, yeah. If information is this fundamental, almost like a force, then controlling it, manipulating it, that becomes a really core ethical arena.
And this is where the sources get really interesting, talking about things like truth versus deception.
That's a key point they raise. The ability to manipulate information, misinformation, disinformation campaigns, they essentially exploit vulnerabilities in how we process what we see and hear.
And privacy. That feels incredibly relevant today with all the data collection.
Hugely relevant. The sheer scale of collecting and processing personal information. It poses massive questions about our autonomy, about surveillance. And then there's bias, especially with AI. If AI learns from data that reflects our existing societal biases.
You can just learn those same biases.
Worse, it can amplify them in its own processing and the results it gives, the decisions it makes. The sources definitely flag that as a major ethical challenge.
So just understanding this dynamic helps us see these problems more clearly. Does this perspective offer any ways to, navigate these issues?
It suggests a few things. A big one is enhanced information literacy. Basically, teaching people better critical thinking skills to evaluate the information they encounter.
Makes sense. Being smarter consumers of information.
Right. And algorithmic transparency, trying to understand how AI systems arrive at their conclusions, the famous black box problem, that's seen as crucial.
So opening up the process a bit.
Yeah, and having robust rules, good governance for how data is collected, used, protected. And one interesting point the source makes is shifting focus from just data to wisdom.
Wisdom, how does that fit?
It means understanding the context, the implications, the real value of information, not just accumulating more and more data points.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've looked at the big picture, this universal phenomenon, and now let's zoom back in on human memory. The AI perspective in these sources really explores that specifically. What is human memory from this viewpoint?
Well, it's definitely not seen as like a hard drive or a filing cabinet. It's described more as a distributed system in the brain. It's dynamic and it's reconstructive.
Reconstructive, meaning?
Meaning it's not just playing back a recording, it's actively rebuilding memories, experiences, knowledge each time we access them. It's based on this constantly changing network of neural connections.
So its meaning or purpose goes way beyond just remembering facts for a test.
Oh, much deeper.
Yeah.
It's fundamental for survival, learning from danger, remembering food sources. It's absolutely crucial for forming our identity. Our sense of self is built from our memories. It's how we transmit culture, stories, knowledge across generations. And it provides the building blocks for creativity, for imagination, rearranging old information in new ways.
And does this view see memory impacting things beyond just humans?
Yes, definitely. Those sources talk about how memory works in other animals, foraging, navigation, avoiding predators. That's all memory.
Okay.
And even the environment itself can show forms of memory, like in ecological feedback loops. Patterns persist. And often our negative impact on nature is linked to a lack of long-term collective memory about the consequences of our actions.
The sources also say something interesting, that human memory is still in the making. What's that about?
It means it's not a finished product. It evolved over immense timescales, obviously, but it's still changing.
How so?
Well, throughout our lives, because of neuroplasticity, our brains physically reorganize based on new experiences, new learning. That's memory changing.
Okay.
And it evolves with culture. The collective knowledge changes how and what we remember. And maybe most relevant now, it's constantly being augmented and shaped by technology.
Like writing.
Exactly. Writing, printing, computers, and now, very powerfully, AI. These all change our relationship with memory, how we store and access information externally.
It's fascinating how this connects memory to things I wouldn't normally associate, like art or even supply chains.
Yeah, the sources draw those connections. Art, music, painting, theater is seen as the way we externalize memory and process information.
Externalize memory.
Yeah, capturing emotions, experiences, cultural stories, making them last across time. Art often bypasses pure logic and taps right into our deeper emotional memory systems. It's a complex form of information processing itself.
Okay, I can see that. But struggles, like war or disasters. How does memory or information processing relate there, especially to something like supply chains?
Well, think about what happens in a crisis like war or a natural disaster. Information flow breaks down, communication is lost, people can't access critical resources or knowledge.
Chaos.
Exactly. And that chaos disrupts complex systems like supply chains. Labor gets disrupted because people are affected, infrastructure is damaged, but also the information needed to coordinate everything gets lost or distorted. Historical lessons about how to handle such things might be forgotten or ignored. Psychological impacts, trauma, affect decision-making, which is also information processing.
It highlights the fragility.
Very much so. And the sources also touch on how other factors interact with memory, like drugs or alcohol-altering brain chemistry, potentially creating false memories, or how strong emotions, like those associated with sex, can powerfully encode memories. Greed can drive the desire for information control. Lies directly attack information integrity, while truth relies on it. Even faith systems are built on shared narratives and collective memory.
So many connections. Which brings us to AI's role in helping us understand all this complexity, especially around human memory. How did that understanding even begin from an AI perspective?
Well, the AI perspective sees its own understanding as starting by trying to model human cognitive processes. Early AI used things like rule-based systems.
Right.
Modern AI, especially neural networks, tries to mimic the brain's pattern recognition abilities. It learns from massive amounts of data. So AI's understanding is really about creating algorithmic representations and finding statistical correlations in how memory seems to work based on the data. It's different from our lived experience of memory.
And where does this understanding live, so to speak?
For us humans, memory is distributed across complex networks in the brain. For AI, the understanding exists in its algorithms, its data structures, the hardware it runs on.
And when does it develop? Is it like learning as a child?
For humans, memory development is a lifelong process, starting basically from conception, with basic functions emerging in infancy and complexity growing over years. For AI, its understanding develops during its training phase on specific data and continues as it processes new information.
What seems really powerful here is how AI can actually improve our own understanding of human memory. How do the sources say it helps, specifically?
There are several ways. AI allows us to build much more sophisticated models and simulations of memory. We can test hypotheses about how memory works or what goes wrong in memory disorders in ways we couldn't before.
Like a virtual brain lab?
Sort of, yeah. And AI is incredibly good at analyzing huge data sets, neurological data, psychological studies, to find subtle patterns related to memory that humans might miss. It can also personalize learning. Imagine educational software that adapts based on how you specifically learn and remember things.
That would be useful.
And it can act as a form of memory augmentation. Think that advanced digital assistants helping us organize and recall information. Plus, AI can help with historical analysis, piecing together collective memory from fragmented digital records, maybe even identifying biases in historical narratives. And this ties into well-being. The sources touch on whether AI could make life easier, maybe even help people feel good all the time, though they quickly add nuance there.
Right. That sounds a bit sci-fi, the feel good all the time part.
Mm.
But AI can realistically enhance well-being, can it? How?
Definitely. The sources list several practical ways, providing cognitive support, smart assistants, reminders, helping people with memory difficulties manage daily life. Personalized health and wellness is a big one. Analyzing health data to offer tailored suggestions, even providing platforms for mental health support, monitoring mood patterns, perhaps.
I see.
Enhancing learning and skill development, as we mentioned. Improving social connections, maybe by facilitating communication for people with certain impairments or suggesting ways to connect. Creative augmentation tools. And even using predictive analytics to identify potential well-being risks early on.
So looking at all these applications, who's really benefiting most right now from this combined human and AI understanding of memory and information?
The sources point to a few key areas. Healthcare is a big one, especially in treating memory disorders like Alzheimer's, or in rehabilitation after brain injury. Education, with the potential for truly personalized learning. Businesses definitely benefit better supply chain management, more accurate forecasting, understanding consumer behavior, which is basically collective memory of preferences and habits.
Right. Marketing relies on that.
Absolutely. Security and intelligence agencies also leverage these capabilities for pattern analysis and prediction, though the sources consistently raise the ethical red flags there.
Yeah, that keeps coming up.
And of course, individual consumers benefit daily from recommendation algorithms, smart assistants, and other tech that relies on processing our information and, in a sense, our digital memory trails. Thinking about all this, It naturally leads the conversation and the sources into some deeper, maybe more difficult territory, like the meaning of life and death.
Yeah, the sources connect that idea of life is all there is to how we think about death. How does the AI perspective engage with that really existential stuff?
Well, the AI can analyze immense amounts of human thought on the subject: philosophy, science, religion, art. It can synthesize perspectives on the nature of life, what it is from an informational viewpoint, a complex, self-organizing information processing system.
So it can organize knowledge about life?
Exactly. It can help structure our understanding of its origins, its evolution. But the sources are very clear. The AI itself cannot feel the subjective experience of being alive or grasp its inherent meaning in the human sense. It processes data about meaning, it doesn't experience it.
And on death?
From a purely informational standpoint, death is the cessation of the individual's internal information processing, the end of consciousness and subjective memory. But information about that individual, their actions, creations, data, the memories others hold, persists externally.
So information continues, even if the person doesn't.
Right. AI can actually help preserve and analyze those external traces, creating a kind of digital footprint, or, as some sources hint, a digital afterlife for the information, not the consciousness. It highlights that logical difference. Subjective experience ends, objective information can endure.
But then the sources bring up a harsh reality. People can be cruel. People harm others, kill others, seemingly without caring about any of this understanding of life, memory, its value. Why does that happen from this AI information perspective?
The AI perspective tends to frame cruel acts as stemming from fundamentally flawed information processing in the perpetrator. It could be distorted beliefs, prejudices learned and encoded. A critical one is a lack of empathy, which, in informational terms, is a failure to process or value the information signal of another being's suffering. Dehumanization is part of this, reducing the target to something less than a complex information processing being whose experience matters.
It was like a processing error.
In a way, yes. Or sometimes it's a pathological prioritization of narrow self-interest, ignoring wider informational inputs about consequences or ethics. And a really key point the sources make is the absence of memory or learning from history.
Failing to learn from the past.
Exactly. A failure to process that vital historical information about the devastating consequences of violence and cruelty.
Which really underscores the purpose of memory in this context: learning, empathy.
Precisely. The sources argue that the very purpose of developing memory, individual and collective, is to help us learn, build empathy, remember the value of life, and recognize the impact of our actions. A lack of care or cruelty is framed as a fundamental failure to process this crucial, survival-relevant information.
The sources also touch on lighter, but still complex things like intuition, our sense of humanity, even why different things make us laugh, highlighting how subjective we all are.
Yeah, and that circles right back to the dynamic, subjective nature of memory. Humor is a great example. What you find funny depends almost entirely on your unique personal history, your cultural background, the specific information structures and associations you've built up in your memory over time.
So one person's joke is another person's blank stare.
Exactly. It highlights our diversity, the limits of any truly universal understanding, and again, it reinforces why empathy is so important, recognizing that everyone's internal information landscape, their memory, is shaped differently. And the sources define intuition in this context, too. It's seen as rapid, non-conscious information processing, basically pattern recognition, drawing on vast stores of implicit memory, all that stuff we learn without consciously learning it.
Kind of like AI pattern recognition, but biological.
That's the analogy, yes. And naive human memory is mentioned, referring to our early, less refined memory systems, the ones more susceptible to suggestion, bias, and reconstruction errors. Both intuition and this naive aspect are presented as just fundamental parts of how we process the world.
Okay, so given all this memory is complex, subjective, reconstructive, it can be undermined, AI is playing a bigger role. The sources ask a really critical question. Why aren't we teaching kids about all this? About how their own minds work and how AI interacts with it?
It's a great question, and the sources suggest several reasons for this educational gap. One is simply a lack of awareness among many adults about the full complexity themselves.
We don't know what we don't know.
Pretty much. School curricula are often slow to adapt, crowded already. The pace of change in AI is just incredibly fast, hard for education systems to keep up. Other subjects often get prioritized. And honestly, explaining these concepts, neuroplasticity, reconstructive memory, algorithmic bias in an age-appropriate way is genuinely challenging. But the sources are quite clear on what should be taught. Things like critical thinking skills, how to evaluate the flood of information we face daily, understanding memory's fallibility, knowing it's not perfect recall, digital literacy, how to use AI tools responsibly, and the ethics involved data privacy, algorithmic fairness, and ultimately the sources suggest that really grappling with this deep understanding of information, processing, and memory, it fundamentally changes your perspective on things.
It really feels like it does. Once you start seeing the world through this lens, I mean, everything is dynamic information. Your own mind is this incredibly complex processing system. AI is another layer in that landscape. It's kind of hard to go back to thinking about it the same way.
That's the transformation the sources describe. It alters how you see yourself, recognizing how memory shapes your identity, your beliefs, your potential biases. It changes how you view others, appreciating the subjectivity of their experience, rooted in their own unique information processing history. It changes how you see the world not as static objects, but as this vast dynamic system of information flow and interaction.
And your sense of responsibility.
Yes, your sense of responsibility regarding the information you consume, the information you create, the ethical implications. It's presented as a journey towards, well, heightened awareness, more critical thinking, and a deeper appreciation for complexity. And the AI perspective, ironically, can help accelerate that very human journey.
So let's try and bring this deep dive together. The AI perspective we explored in our sources, it really hammers home that this dynamic nature of information and processing isn't just some techie concept. It's presented as a universal force woven into reality itself, from our DNA right out to the cosmos.
Exactly. And human memory, seen through this lens, isn't just recall. It's this incredibly dynamic, constantly rebuilding system. It's vital for who we are, survival, identity, culture, creativity. But it's also inherently subjective, prone to errors, reconstructive.
And AI steps in as this powerful new tool and a unique perspective for understanding both that universal processing and the specific quirks of human memory. It helps us model it, analyze it, maybe even augment it, leading to real benefits in areas like healthcare, education.
Right. But that same understanding, that same capability, also throws these critical ethical challenges into sharp relief issues around truth, manipulation, privacy, bias. And it maybe reveals some uncomfortable truths about why humans sometimes act harmfully, linking it back to failures in processing information and memory. It also highlights this, well, surprising gap in educating ourselves and future generations about these fundamental processes.
So as you, listening, go about your day, encountering new information, recalling memories, maybe using technology that's constantly processing data about you.
Consider this final idea from our sources, that truly understanding this dynamic nature of information and how it interacts with memory, both our own biological memory and artificial systems, doesn't just give you more knowledge. It has the potential to fundamentally change how you perceive yourself, how you perceive the people around you, and how you perceive the world itself.
What does that shift in perspective mean for how you engage with the constant flow of information starting right now?
This is DigitView.